Hey everybody, welcome to episode 7 of the poker vlog. If this is your first time watching, my name is Austin Moore and I appreciate you checking out my channel. So I usually like to include personal aspects of my life into these videos, show you guys that life isn't just only about poker. And in this episode, I'm just including some moments from my trip to Lake Havasu City over the 4th of July. Went out there, some of my closest friends, really just had a blast. We had a boat for a day, went to the channel, met some really cool people, got some sun, and altogether the trip was a total blast. So the Friday following the 4th, I actually played this session. It was July 7th. It was a Friday night, Lake Elsinore. Tons of action over there, the 2-3 game. And it started off real bumpy for me. Really just seemed like my opponents kept getting real lucky on me. I was pretty frustrated in the beginning, but I changed tables, changed my attitude, the luck changed around for me, and I was able to lock in a profitable session. So before we get into the actual poker content of these clips, I just want to share a couple moments from my trip to Lake Havasu City, and I hope you guys enjoy both. Let's go. Alright guys, so it's my first time playing since my Havasu trip. I just got seated at the table. I'm on the board for a table change to go play with my boy Manny. And I see a under the gun straddle and 3 players make the call. I look down at Jack 8 suited in the cutoff. And I want to try and steal this money. I make it 30 bucks to go. And the button pretty much snap calls. I don't love this. The player in the under the gun position also goes ahead and makes the call, and the player in middle position also makes the call. Given that everybody made the call here, I think they all are going to have somewhat decent kind of drawing hands. And when the board comes out King 4 Jack all hearts and the action checks over to me, I'm not about to step foot in any kind of a trap, so I just go ahead and check it as well. The player on the button checks and we go to a turn, which is the 10 of clubs. The action checks over to me again, and I think this wouldn't be a terrible place to put a bet out, but I really just don't love my hand at this point. I'm a little bit scared money, and I just go ahead and check it as well. The player on the button checks, and we go to a river, which is the deuce of hearts. Now anybody with a heart is definitely going to be beating my second pair, and I just go ahead and check it again. The player on the button makes a $30 bet at this point, and everybody folds up to me. I think I could make the call here. I'm getting laid like over 5 to 1, almost 6 to 1, but I just go ahead and fold. The player on the button shows pocket threes for a small bluff, but it gets the job done and makes me lose $30 in this hand. So given how fast that every other player folded and the strength of my opponent on the button's hands, I think a bet on the turn definitely would have sealed the deal for me and allowed me to win a over $100 pot for my first hand. But I think I just wasn't really thinking all the way there yet, and I was a little bit scared of all the hearts. So we'll just move on to the next hand now. So I don't feel like I'm off to a great start. I definitely could have made the call on the last hand, but that's history now. I see 2 players limp in. I've now gained position on the player who had pocket threes on the button. He's one of the limpers. I want to punish him, so I make it $21 to go in the hijack after I look down at pocket queens. The player on the button goes ahead and makes the call. The player in the small blind makes the call. The player in the big blind also makes the call. And of course, who else do you think makes the call? The player with pocket threes from the last hand in middle position. So we're now going to head 5 ways to a flop. I definitely feel like I'm going to have the best hand a lot of the time, but it's poker. You never really know what the best hand is until you see 3 cards in the middle. So the flop comes out, and it comes out 9 high with a 2 and a 4 2 hearts on board, there's going to be straight draws and flush draws here. So when the action checks over to me, I want to put out a healthy sized bet that's really going to deny equity from these kinds of hands. So I make a bet of $55, and it really doesn't take long. The player in the button, the small blind, and the big blind all get out of there pretty quickly. But the player in middle position from the last hand, he, shuffles chips around, takes his time, and eventually decides to also make the call here. So I'm going to be going heads up against a player that just bluffed me. I'm not excited about it, but it is what it is. He puts the money in the middle, and we go to a turn. The turn is not very helpful to me. It comes the 8 of hearts. It completes the flush draw, doesn't complete any straight draws, but my opponent checks over to me and I check as well. Once the 4 of spades comes out on the river, it pairs the board. My opponent puts out a bet of $90. I snap call because I'm getting a very good price of over 3 to 1, and he pretty quickly shows King 10 of hearts for a completed flush on the turn. So not only did he bluff me in the last hand, but he now has got there on the turn with a flush draw against my pocket queens. I'm not happy, but that's just poker. I add $200 onto my stack at this point and move on to the next hand. So if you thought I was running good and playing better in the last 2 hands, just wait until you see this one. The player in the under the gun position makes a raise to $20, and the player on the button goes ahead and moves all in for a total of $66. I look down at ace queen offsuit in the big blind and decide to make a raise to try and isolate the player on the button. He really could have any 2 cards in his hand at this point. So I make it $132 to go. The player under the gun folds pretty quickly. We go to a run out, which comes king, deuce, 8, 3, 5. I don't hit anything, and my opponent shows that he had me completely dominated pre-flop anyways with ace king suited. So we're going to lose another $66 here, and my ego's kind of crushed after just back to back to back losing hands. But that's just poker. We're going to grind it out and get all of this money back, I promise. So it's time to make some money back. The under the gun player limps in for $3. I see this. I want to try and isolate him, so I make it $16 to go. I'm looking down at ace 8 offsuit on the button, but I forget to show my hole cards to the camera. Um, Sorry about that, guys. The player in the small blind goes ahead and makes the call, and the player under the gun also goes ahead and makes the call. So my isolation plan doesn't necessarily work here, but I at least have position over everyone. And I enjoy the flop quite a bit as it comes ace 5-10 with 2 hearts. The action checks over to me, and given that there are 2 possible straight draws and a flush draw, I don't love my bet sizing. I put out $15, and I think I really should have gone a lot higher because of just how many draws there are. But either way, the player in the small blind goes ahead and makes the call here, and the under the gun player goes ahead and folds his cards. The 6 of diamonds comes out on the turn, and the small blind player almost immediately bets out for $40. I really don't put my opponent on a strong holding at this point. I've watched him play very aggressive with second or third pair and draws. So when he makes this bet, I want to really put him to the test. I make a raise to $110. I think this is going to be a good move to try and rep top 2 pair or even just top pair with a solid kicker. But it pretty much backfires immediately because my opponent goes all in for $245. I'm basically pot committed at this point. I think he only has a draw, so I go ahead and make the call. And the 5 of hearts comes out on the river. I was completely wrong because my opponent shows pocket 6s for a turn set, making me really wish that I had gone bigger on the flop for bet sizing because I think I gave him a decent enough price to call and have some kind of implied odds if he did hit his set, which the dealer really didn't like me and decided to give him his set and give him those implied odds. So I think I make a bad raise on the turn and a bad call for the all-in. My opponent could have had 2 pair or something along those lines, but just given the way that I watched him play other hands, I was really just a non-believer, and it ended up costing me pretty big in this hand. So it's only been about 30 minutes of playtime during this session. I'm down in the hole for $600, and I'm going to keep on playing. I didn't wait a whole week of not playing while on vacation to just leave after 30 minutes. So I pull out another $300, but before I actually decide to continue playing, I just call one of my buddies. I go outside and really just vent out how I'm feeling. It's annoying that people seem to keep on getting there on the turn against me. There's a couple hands I didn't show where people, got there on the turn against me. And, like I've said on this vlog a few times, and I've said in my own life 100 million times, that's just poker, baby. It's how things go. You got to take the good with the bad. And yeah, so I vent out my feelings. I come back inside, see about 3 hands before getting moved to the main game where my boy Manny's at. He was in the last vlog. Good job if you guys watched all the way through and saw him. If you didn't, I hope you watch all the way through on this next one. So either way, we get moved to the main game. It's a very deep stack table. I'm feeling good about my chances to get my money back. And yeah, let's hope we run good and play better, guys. So starting off at the new table, there's a ton of limping and straddling going on, which is a very good sign of a juicy table. I see a straddle and 2 players call, and I look down at ace queen offsuit in the big blind, so I make a raise to $35. And pretty quickly the player under the gun calls, and so does the player in the under the gun +1. The other player who originally called the straddle just goes ahead and lets his cards go at this point. And in my head, I'm kind of thinking that these other 2 players are calling pretty wide just because of how fast that they called and how deep their stacks are. So when I see the flop come out as king 5-6 with 2 hearts, I don't want to leave any room for mistakes. I'm pretty short stacked myself, so I just decide to flick in a chip for all in for $160 effective. I can easily rep the king here with my pre-flop raising size, and yeah, it seems to work out as both players check their cards and fold shortly after, and we're going to take down a profit of $76 with just ace high. It's a pretty good start to the new table, and it gives me a little bit of confidence going forward. So in this next hand, I look down at 6-7 offsuit, and like I said before, there's a ton of limping going on. 2 players limp in before me, and I just want to get a little bit more value into this hand with position, so I make it $6 to go. And the cutoff player decides to call, the player on the button decides to call, the small blind player decides to call, and the other 2 players that limped in previously also go ahead and make the call. So we had 6 ways to a flop that comes 3, 8, 9 with 2 diamonds, and the low jack player, action checks over to him and he makes a bet of $20. I kind of consider raising here at this point, but I'm really not too deep stacked still and really don't want to scare anybody else off. I think other players with maybe just an 8 or a 9 will make the call here. So I just call, the player in the cutoff calls, and so does the player in the small blind. We had 4 ways to the turn now, which comes pretty much perfect, the 10 of clubs. It introduces a second flush draw, and now that I have a pretty strong made hand, when the low jack player decides to lead out again for $20, I'm definitely planning to raise. So I count out some chips and make a raise to $95. The player in the cutoff really doesn't seem too thrilled about this. He takes quite a while of shuffling chips and thinking about his decision at this point. I think he could easily have a hand that includes a 7 or a jack or diamonds or clubs, but he ends up laying his hand down. The small blind also goes ahead and lays his hand down, and the action is now just on the low jack. I really don't have any idea what he could have here after leading the flop for $20 and then betting $20 again on the turn, but he goes all in for about $150 effective. I snap call with the bottom end of the straight, really hoping to dodge some clubs or diamonds here, and this does end up being the case when the 3 of spades comes out on the river. My opponent actually just goes ahead and shows ace queen offsuit for a very strangely played hand, and I'm going to take down a pretty large sized pot with the bottom end of the straight. If a jack came on this river, I probably would have flipped over the whole table and stormed out, but luckily that didn't happen, and I was able to take down a very sizable pot with a very marginal hand. I think that if my opponent did make some kind of a raise pre-flop with his very strong hand, I would have easily gotten out of the way, and not to say that he wouldn't have been beat by somebody else's hand, but I think he would have had a much better chance of actually winning this hand. But either way, I got very lucky with hitting my straight on the turn, not getting raised pre-flop, and from this point going forward, I think I need to play a little bit tighter. But that being said, I am just going to try and play my position and not let my hands be too polarized. So in this next hand, I look down at ace-6 offsuit on the button. There's been a raise to $15 from the player in the under the gun position, and typically this is going to be a really strong bet. Anytime anyone raises under the gun, they should have a very strong holding. But when I see the under the gun +1, the middle position, and the cutoff all go ahead and make the call, I think I'm getting laid a very good price to also make the call myself. So being on the button, I call the $15. The player in the big blind position also calls the $15. And we're now headed 6 ways to a flop, which comes out ace, deuce, 10, all spades. I flop top pair on this board, and the action all checks over to me pretty fast. So I think if anyone did have a spade or even two spades in their hand, they definitely would have bet this flop. So when I see the action check over to me, I put out a bet of $55. I think I'm going to have the best hand a lot of the time here. And it does seem that way when the action folds over to the player in middle position. The player in middle position is pretty short stacked. He only has $46 left, and he just decides to go all in at this point. And I don't really love this because he could definitely have been trapping at this point with a flush or a bigger ace. But I mean, I already have my money in there. There's nothing I can do. The player in the cutoff folds. I put an extra dollar in and take $10 back, and we go to a run out. The run out does seem to help me a little bit. It's the 6 of hearts on the turn and the 4 of spades on the river. I don't love the extra spade on the river, given that my opponent could have a spade for a flush now. But when I tell my opponent that I made 2 pair, he says you're good and actually shows over ace jack offsuit with no spade. So I got very lucky on the turn here, made 2 pair, and ended up making a better hand than my opponent. I make a profit of $126, and I'm feeling pretty good about how hot that I seem to be running at this point. So I certainly would not always recommend playing this hand in other positions in the same way, but being on the button, you get a little bit of leeway to play a lot more hands. There's already a good chunk of change in the pot, so I just flicked in the money and ended up getting very lucky on the turn. I was pretty far behind, seeing as that there should only really be 3 more 6s in the deck, and those are the only cards that are going to allow me to catch up, unless the board paired and a higher card like a king or a queen ended up coming out. But either way, I end up getting very lucky. Kind of like I was saying earlier when I was losing, that's just poker, baby. So let's hope that this luck continues as we move into the next hand. So in the final very interesting hand of this session, I look down at ace-8 offsuit on the cutoff position. The hijack player makes a raise to $10, and I want to try to isolate him. It feels like a very weak bet, so I make it $25 to go. And the hijack player doesn't take very long before making the call here. So we're going to head to a flop, heads up, and I have position over this player. The flop comes out, and it's king, king, 7 with 2 hearts. I do hold the ace of hearts in my hand, so I'm feeling pretty good about this board to bluff on it. The hijack player checks over to me, and I put out a bet of $30, just repping any of the kings or pocket pairs that are going to be higher than a 7 at this point. And the hijack player goes ahead and makes the call. The 3 of hearts comes out on the turn, and the hijack player checks it over to me again. I want to look like I'm a little bit scared of the hearts on board, but that I also want to keep getting value in the pot. So I make a little bit larger bet to $40 at this point. And the hijack player goes ahead and hits the tank for a little while. He checks his cards, counts out the chips, shuffles them around, and really just takes his time before finally making the call. I think that at this point he's considering bluffing, or, just he has some kind of a cruel intention in my mind when he does this. So when the 5 of hearts comes out on the river, the hijack player pretty quickly just decides to move all in. It's a very strange bet, and it makes me a little bit worried that he could have some kind of a boat, but I did make the nut flush, so I snap call very quickly. I ask him what he has. I ask him if he has a boat. He ends up showing pocket deuces with the deuce of hearts, and I show my ace of hearts to take down this pot. It's a massive pot. I make a profit of $489 in this hands. It's very strange the way that my opponent played this. He very certainly could have had a boat given the way that he played it, but I think that if he did end up trapping like this and have a boat, it's really just a hand that I have to pay off after making a nut flush on the river. There's not going to be any King X holdings that he's going to call a 3-bet and raise preflop with that would have ended up making a boat, so he really would have to have flopped a set for a boat or turned or rivered a set for a boat. So I end up just making the call here. It ends up being very profitable, and this is going to wrap up our session. Hey everybody, like I said at the beginning of this episode, it was a very rough to start session, and it had been about a week since I played any poker and pretty much didn't do any studying while I was on vacation, so all of these factors showed up in my gameplay. And on top of that, I think I just got a little bit unlucky to start in the first couple of hands, so it just kind of is what it is. The first ace-8 offsuit hand, I probably didn't need to call off my entire stack there, but I think I had really just pot committed myself when I made the raise to $110. My opponent that was in this specific hand had been getting out of line a couple of times. I think against a different opponent, maybe a tighter one, I probably would have been able to make the fold on the turn there. But against this specific player and how he was playing, it really seemed like I did need to make the call. I got very lucky in a couple of other hands following that ace-8 offsuit, with the 6-7 making a straight on the turn and the ace-6 offsuit making 2-pair on the turn as well. And really, that's just how poker goes. You never really know if you're going to be the lucky one or if your opponent will be the lucky one for the day. So the final hand that was obviously the biggest one was the ace-8 offsuit, where I made a 4-card flush on the river. I think my bet style and approach to the flop and the turn, I was really just trying to rep a king of some sorts. And when the turn brought a 3-card flush, I tried to make it look like I was a little bit scared by down betting. I think my opponent picked up on this and tried to over bluff the river when the 4th heart came, but little did he know I was actually bluffing myself and had the ace of hearts. So I think I played that hand really well to get my opponent to bluff in the way that he did, and it worked out pretty well for me. So altogether, I was in for $900 in this session. I cashed out for a total of $1,150. I think I played roughly 4 to 5 hours during this session, and I probably could have played longer, but once I had all of my money back and some profit locked up, I just decided to get out of there and not risk too much more. So if you guys think you would have played hands differently during this session, definitely drop it in the comment section below. If you guys like the content, please give that like and subscribe. It's going to help this channel grow a lot. And don't forget to stay tuned for the next episode. Let's go.